Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today I'm one third of what is fair to say is a very big deal here in the Tortoise Shack. Remember folks, the Echo Chamber podcast is a free-flowing conversation that may occasionally touch on mature subjects. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Martin McMahon. Hey Martin.
How you doing, Tony?
But more importantly, I'm delighted to say that we are joined by one of the finest writers and journalists in the country. He's a special correspondent with the Irish Examiner, regular on another podcast that shall not be named, and the author of A Force for Justice, the Maurice McCabe Story. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mick Clifford.
Just an introduction like that, Tony. I'll have to bag that something or do something with it, you know, put a label on it. Thanks very much.
TM, we give you a little patent on that. Listen, you think I'm excited. Martin hasn't slept since he thought you were going to come in.
I'm very grateful for you to coming on here, Mick. Long time fan, first time caller. You're the son of Kerry. They love you. You're the only person that brings them any silverware.
Oh, jeez. Mark, that's very harsh altogether. Wait till my namesake David Clifford gets motoring now and you'll see.
He's a special talent, isn't he? And,
I tell people he's my cousin, but reflected glory, he's the only one.
I think at this stage you might get away with son, Mick.
Grandson. I'm not going there.
Anyway, look, there's only one story and it's wall to wall. Would you mind giving us an overview, Mick, of where we are and why we are where we are?
Yeah, bubbling around the background for the last few weeks, Labour TD Alan Kelly's been asking questions of the Minister for Justice. They're associated with the O'Higgins Commission of Inquiry, which looked into Maurice McCabe's allegations about Garda malpractice. It would certainly appear that Kelly is operating on very sound information. That, it would appear again, is coming from somewhere senior within the general criminal justice area. The gist of what he was asking was the knowledge of Francis Fitzgerald, the then Minister for Justice, of a strategy to target Maurice McCabe and go after him behind the closed doors of the O'Higgins Commission. Now, we broke this in the Examiner when the report came out in May 16, but a year previously when it started out, there was a strategy to try and portray McCabe as having a grudge, and that this grudge was the reason he brought his complaints of malpractice. And a lot of it centred on a meeting that was had between Maurice McCabe and two other guards back in 2008, and they said McCabe expressed a grudge at this. Then, once all that was laid out, Maurice McCabe pops up and he had a tape recording of it which showed there was no grudge whatsoever. The strategy was dropped, even though for the rest of the 6 months that it was on, they were very hostile towards him. They had no leg to stand on with that.
But they tried to use that strategy almost to the steps of the courthouse in if I can use that analogy, that it was really just, you know, it was that only for Maurice had two.
Oh, he'd have been buried.
Yeah, he had two mobile phone recordings.
Yeah.
I think it was, which I have to say it's ironic that he can find his and the Garda Commissioner couldn't find hers.
That's a very good point actually. He had to go looking for it. He didn't even know he had it.
Yeah.
But he'd have been buried without, and that's only one of about 4 different occasions that he had tape recorded meetings to protect himself, and if he hadn't produced it, he'd have been buried. But what all that leads to today is Alan Kelly obviously got information that the Minister for Justice of the day was made aware that this was going on. He kept asking these questions for the last few weeks. He kept getting esoteric answers, that the answers weren't given directly. Then on Monday night it emerges that Katie Hannon put in a request to the Department of Justice, she says on the basis of a tip-off, and it turns out that this produced this email that was sent to Francis Fitzgerald back at this time in May 2015, which shows she was made aware of what was going on. She has 2 problems there. The first is she did nothing about it.
Yes.
In other words, she didn't act to protect a man whom she was publicly praising at the time. The second problem she has is that when the report came out a year later, when we in the Examiner broke the story about what had happened, she gave the impression that this was the first she'd heard of it. And those are 2 problems she has around it. Now, as we see, all that has led to kerfuffle in the Dáil Sinn Féin set down a motion of no confidence, and the big game changer, I suppose, was Fianna Fáil on Thursday evening deciding that they could not abstain and they'd be supporting Sinn Féin's motion of confidence. So as of now, Friday afternoon, we're at a point where it would appear either some compromise is reached, the most obvious one being Francis Fitzgerald having to resign, or else we're heading for Christmas general election.
Now, in that, the Taoiseach just said that she had seen it, forgot she saw it, and that anyway, the legal advice that she sought retrospectively said that she couldn't play any hand, act or part in it. Now, I get what she's saying, but I also get that you can't hold two positions. You can't protect a whistleblower and then, to me, if it was so important that the legal advice, that it needed legal advice, why wasn't it sought then, there and then? Some paper trail, something happened. It beggars my belief, and it's my belief, only mine, that an email that at the very least showed tacit approval or involvement by the government, that there is no question. It was so unimportant that it was forgotten about straight away.
I think it's important to say just before what this hangs on is the final couple of sentences where it says that she had, it was...
It says you don't have to do anything.
Yes, it was more or less, we're paraphrasing here, but it was more or less saying, as if saying the last question, if someone handed you a test of 20 questions and you went through it all the through, and then question number 20 said, you just don't need to hand this test in.
Exactly. And that's the thing, and I think you're right, Martin, in what you're saying. I mean, could you get an email about what was potentially an explosive political situation, the Maurice McCabe story, which had seen a Garda Commissioner, a Secretary General Department, a Minister, all leave their offices, and a year later you get this email? Would it not set off lights flashing, is the first thing. The second thing, even if you just read it and you didn't think much of it, a year later, when it explodes, that you couldn't remember even then that you did. And the third thing, this thing of legal advice, in my mind, that doesn't wash for this reason. Nobody's saying that she had to interfere with a commission or anything. All that would be done in that situation would be the most natural thing in the world, which she would do in plenty of other instances in her capacity, and that is ring up the Garda Commissioner and say, I see this is going on. I'm very surprised on the basis of what we're saying publicly about Maurice McCabe. What's the story?
Yeah.
Now that would have been, and the second thing she could have done, she was represented separately legally at this commission.
Yes.
She could have got her lawyer to make a point to saying, this, I just want to on record, this is nothing to do with the Department of Justice, whatever the Garda are putting forward, we're nothing to do with it. She could have done a number of things like that. What she did was looked away. Now, I suspect she looked away because she thought on some level, if she was conscious of it, she says she forgot, but whatever way you look at it, anything to do with that had the potential to have fallout, and the best option was to do nothing.
Even if you dig a little deeper on it, and I know it says that at the bottom, I know it says it, but at the top it says, for the attention of the Minister. Now, why was an email that was that potentially had nothing to do with her, or that she could do nothing, why was it sent to her? What were the circumstances? Was somebody tipping her off to something going on?
I would suspect it was sent to her because they're obsessed on one level, which is ironic, with process in places like the department. Once she is informed, the official whose job it would be to inform her has covered his or her ass.
Yeah. And this is what I'm getting to. Is there this group within justice that may spread over into guards and may well spread, who knows, too slow. We don't know where this spreads. Is there a very small core group of people who are orchestrating all of this, and that basically she was hung out to dry by her own officials?
I don't think there's a small group orchestrating it. I think there's an attitude, a corporate attitude you could call it, in there that circles the wagons, and that decided relatively early on they didn't like McCabe, and accepted on some level the scurrilous rumours that were being put out about McCabe, and didn't question those rumours or anything. They accepted it because that seemed to be the position of a lot of people within the Gardaí, and they all circled the wagons. And thereafter, anything that came up in relation to Maurice McCabe, they were certainly not going to give him the benefit of the doubt or anything like that. they had an attitude. I don't think it is a concerted conspiracy. I think it's far more a kind of a corporate attitude that is similar to the attitude you have in the Gardaí, in the prison service, to some extent in the likes of the HSE. But just the area of criminal justice itself, it is all more serious. It is all more of that us against the world type of thing, you know. I think that's the problem.
When you said it as a corporate culture, coming from someone who works in corporations and financial institutions, I accept that the monolith can be the actual the all-encompassing. But what I have to say, which goes back to the public pronouncements that we heard of people coming out in support of Maurice McCabe, whereby, and I hate to be so flippant, but people said the dogs on the streets knew he was dodgy, or there were these stories were allowed to fester. They were allowed to undermine him. You know him as an individual, as a man. I mean, surely that must have got in on him.
Oh yeah, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, the man and his family were put through hell for 10 years. I mean, serious psychological hell. I mean, you put yourself in his position. There were elements in the Gardaí that wanted him buried. He had stepped outside the wagons, if you want to put it that way. The Omerta, exactly. He'd stepped outside that. Careers felt threatened. The whole way things were done was threatened. And they went after him. And the book, Force for Justice, that I wrote, I mean, I've enumerated a number of cases there, specific cases, where they went after him in the most nefarious way you can imagine, and he was put through hell. But in relation to the political end, I have to say this. I think Francis Fitzgerald has serious questions to answer. But I would ask the question, any candidate for Minister for Justice in any of the big parties, including Sinn Féin, Fianna Fáil, I just wonder, under the circumstances that prevailed, would any of them have done anything different? Because if you look at what happened there, a lot of TDs, most of them opposition TDs, looked at what McCabe was at, they got close to him, and yet they were doing so in an environment where those scurrilous rumours were swirling. Most of them didn't want to take a chance, they didn't want to invest political capital. The only people, to my mind, who did something positive for him and who got past all the scurrilous stuff were Mick Wallace and Claire Daly, and also John McGuinness, who was the chairman of Public Accounts. They had heard the rumours, they knew what was out there, but they met the man and they investigated, and they realised that not alone was there nothing to it, but that it was being used to try and bury him and his complaints of malpractice.
You're right, Mick. There is a lot of politicians now who are on the bandwagon. There's a whole lot of them. But those who looked past these, and they were seedy, awful, nasty, as evil as you can get for any. We're three men with children. We know that these allegations are nasty. In my view, Tuesday is where they got the ammunition to bury him. That was, to me, was the original badness. What do you feel on that?
I'm not convinced, Martin, to this point. The Tuesday file was out there. Some people definitely had access to it. That was the most scurrilous one of all, where a file got mixed up.
Copy and paste error.
Yeah, there was an allegation then that he'd been involved in child rape, which was just which led to the setting up of the tribunal to sort it out. But to my mind, you see, there was an original allegation, which, and again, thankfully, this has been trashed out in public. Luckily, it has, this last summer. Back in 2006, there was an awful lot of problems in Ballybor. Among them, one guy had issues. Maurice McCabe reported him because what had been done, in his view, it couldn't be let go. That man was disciplined. 8-9 months later, his daughter makes a complaint against Maurice McCabe, a historic complaint. That's investigated. The investigating guard, the local chief state solicitor, the DPP, all of them decide there was nothing to this. It had no credibility. The chief state solicitor locally said if it had happened and there was no evidence that it had, it amounted to horseplay. The DPP said the girl there's huge credibility problems, so it was dismissed. But we all know, if there's a rumour, if there's a germ for a rumour, if people want to use that in a nefarious manner, they can. I give you an example. Back in the 90s, there was, and I don't want to name him because there's no point in giving credence to it. It became public, but there was a very well-known sportsman.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah, and a rumour got out there, and the whole country had it, that this guy had interfered with children, that he was Mr. X. You might remember the X case.
Yes,
He was
yes.
the man
He had to
responsible.
go to the Late Show.
He ended up, but he went on to Pat Kenny.
Pat Kenny.
He went,
sorry.
and I think he went into the Sunday World, and he went into the Sunday World, and he just came out and said, "This has been going out about me," and it was, and the whole thing was baseless. Now, in that instance, that man was and is a very popular individual. So nobody, I would suggest, was out to get him. It was just a rumour that organically took off and the whole country had it. You put that in a scenario where there are people out to get somebody, which is what was the case with McCabe, and they had this germ of a thing that in reality was a baseless thing that was associated with his work. You can turn that into whatever you want in that whole rumour machine. Guards briefing journalists, briefing politicians, pass from one to another. It goes from being an organic thing to being a malicious thing. I don't know whether it was just that or whether a lot of individuals in high places had access to that erroneous TUSLA file, but it was one of the two.
Well, can I ask then, because obviously Superintendent David Taylor, who then flipped in effect from becoming the Garda spokesperson to becoming the a whistleblower of in his own right, he knows what we all suspect, and what people have really made their minds up about. And even if the Charlton inquiry hasn't reached its conclusions, the public have really made their minds up about this. But David Taylor, he was put in a position whereby, as shit rolls downhill, excuse me, but it looked very much like a case whereby he had a Damascene conversion at the last possible moment, and that again, strikes me as something that is going to be that just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, one way or the other, he's a source into the story now, as far as the Disclosure Tribunal is concerned. He'll be a crucial witness there.
Yeah.
As Garda press officer, he says he briefed negatively in a systemic way against Maurice McCabe. He says he did so on instructions of the Garda Commissioner, Martin Callan. Callan denies that. The tribunal will have to decide. If his evidence was accepted on any level, it would point towards a specific conspiracy out of Garda HQ to discredit and even destroy the character of Maurice McCabe. We have to wait and see whether that is determined, but Taylor's no reason to make stuff up. But then again, as I say, others deny any involvement in that.
On the Charlton Tribunal, the fact that email didn't go.
Yeah.
Now that has to, and Fine Gael are coming out very strong and saying, look, it's in a tribunal, and this is the way it should happen. But the tribunal was not furnished with one document we know of.
How many more?
There's the question. How can anybody have faith in it now?
In the tribunal?
In that the tribunal has all it needs.
That's fair enough. How nobody, I think, can have faith now in that the Department of Justice has furnished the tribunal with anything that might have anything to do with this. And, to that extent, definitely you won't get the full picture. My own view, having been down there and seen what they're at, I think Charlton's going to do a very good job. But even this alone, I think, is going to ensure that whatever stuff is buried in the department is going to have to get over there. Because anybody who messes around now, after we're through the brink of a government collapsing, they're taking great risks. And one thing they're all convinced of is watching their own back once it comes to that.
And which actually says there's another gap in the Charlton inquiry. And again, I've been reading it. I know writing a broadsheet that I know some of the people on broadsheet
they've done a good job
of just systemically, almost transcripts of the whole entire thing. So it's all there. But one point that doesn't get enough of a spotlight really, and for whatever reason that is because a lot of people who were briefed by David Taylor aren't cooperating. We have media members who are not providing, who are just hiding behind privilege. And we're now at that stage where, so we know we have the Department of Justice that has that may not have provided full disclosure, and we have people who actually can vindicate what David Taylor is saying that they won't play that they won't give that information over. So Judge Charlton, as good a job as he seems to clearly be doing, and when he questioned, for example, the people from TUSLA themselves, I thought he did a great job in terms of, you live in the town, you know this man, and how can you not actually be aware of Maurice McCabe? Like, you might have well sat across and had coffee from him, but you're telling me he doesn't exist. So, you know, where do you think we go with this next, Mick?
Well, as I say, I still have a lot of faith that Charlton will uncover most of what happened, and that the truth will come out that way. What's going to change? I don't know. That's a bit like Frances Fitzgerald. As of now, she hasn't resigned. She may not. We may have a general election. Whether we have a general election or whether she resigns, I don't believe that's going to lead to a hell of a lot of change.
And this is, for me, I see this. She's not the only person with questions to answer on the front bench. She's not. Leo Varadkar stood up and he spoke with the information he had to hand. But there were others sitting there that had information that he did not have.
Charlie Flanagan.
Yeah.
Well, definitely. And, like, again, having observed this, I have to say what strikes me for the likes of Charlie Flanagan, Francis Fitzgerald, Alan Shatter, to a large extent, ministers, again, you're back to the culture in the Department of Justice. To a certain extent, ministers become captive in the department.
Yes.
No, and I think in that context, look, Flanagan is a solicitor. He's a solicitor from Portlaoise. He'd have, one would imagine, I don't know personally, but one would imagine on that basis he'd have some bit of street smarts. He'd have some bit of idea what the guards can be like, both in terms of how good they can be and how bad they can be. Alan Shatter has a legal background, but he was involved in family law, and that I would wonder how streetwise he might have been in terms of dealing with the guards department. Similarly, Frances Fitzgerald, she came from a background that had nothing to do with any of that either, and I just wonder from that point of view, is it possible that to the less extent you're plugged in to the type of things that go on in the Department of Justice, is the potential to be captive and to be dictated your agenda by the department far greater?
I always go on ahead, Mark.
We know it's not just the Department of Justice. It's not the only department that to degrees holds their ministers captive.
Yeah.
But it is definitely the one that can do an awful lot of damage, particularly to people's reputations. What is it that's going on? Why can't we fix what's going on in the department? Why is that unfixable? Why is that undiscoverable?
Good question. I think it's deep-rooted. After Alan Shatter left, they had this Toland report that was supposed to sort things out. We see now, May 15, you know, they were telling their minister don't do anything. We see now, November 17, they're not handing over stuff to the tribunal. I think it is really deep-rooted what's in there. And I've seen this, I've done work for the Examiner in other areas like the prisons, and there's a similar attitude, and that feeds back to the common denominator is the department. It hasn't changed yet. One can only hope that when this stuff keeps churning out, it's going to lead to incremental change. The other side of that coin does, as I say, we're 3.5 years down the line, and don't see
like the fear is always that the Charlton report will come out and it will gather dust on a shelf, as same as every other
quite
report.
Possible. Yeah, quite possible.
We had got, like we have, and this brings me to the other point that I can't reconcile. We have a Garda Commissioner who retired under we have a Justice Minister who we lost in Alan Shatter. We have Martin Callan as a Garda Commissioner who retired. We have Noreen O'Sullivan who stepped down and now has taken up a job as a head of an international policing authority. Now, realistically, we don't know the situation, but I would give my best guess was that Frances Fitzgerald will now be the second Minister for Justice who will now resign to save off a general election for a few weeks or months or whatever the case may be. And Maurice McCabe technically is still in the dock, you know.
Yeah, technically, yeah. Well, I don't know, is he? I don't know to the extent that I think the general public know.
Not in the court of public opinion, no. He's been vindicated and there.
From his perspective, the good thing about the Charlton Tribunal is, to the greatest extent, it has nothing to do with him. It has to do with what others were trying to do to him.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, no, but I'd say one thing, it wouldn't surprise me if the attitudes that prevailed towards him, going back 3-4 years before the whole tide of public opinion turned, it wouldn't surprise me if those attitudes are still to be found in areas in justice and in the Gardaí, in certain areas.
I definitely think that much is being made of the email, and an awful lot is being made of the email. But the public opinion has swayed, and the email is the straw. It's not the source of their dissatisfaction. We have come to a point where enough is enough, and it seems to be that the public has now said, Maurice McCabe has laid out his table. We believe Maurice McCabe. You guys are the shady characters.
I wonder to this extent, Martin, if it turns out there's a general election, I'd say after 24, 48 hours, that'll fade completely
there is this fear. It's going to move, and I've already seen it. You can see the lexicon already moving to other issues, homelessness, hospitals. And if it goes into election mode, there is that huge fear. And we're in this position, Mick, where we could well have a general election. If not now, if Francis falls on her sword, they will limp on maybe January, February, depending on what comes up. I mean, Maurice is still to speak, so there's a lot of stuff to happen here yet. But a change of administration where we have Lanigan's Ball, where Fine Gael step out and Fianna Fáil step in, is that going to change the culture anywhere?
There's no indication that it will, Martin. Do you know what I mean? No, I have to say in these things, there are incremental change. I think the Gardaí is going to change. It's going to change slowly. Probably requires somebody from the outside to go in there. Is there going to be changes in the department? It's quite possible, but it's going to be incremental. No matter who comes in, it's going to be incremental.
In Rome, they used to have the lictors. Do you remember the lictors? That if you were the council, these lads would walk around, flank you on either side, and they'd have the little, like a scythe with the axe on the top.
Yeah.
And they literally they could behead people if anybody put a hand on your,
Yeah.
But they were appointed for life. So you as a council maybe got a 1 year term, a 2 year term, but these lads were appointed for life, and eventually they just used to look at the council and go, you come and go, but we're in charge, baby. And that's
There's an element to that there, absolutely. There's no question about it. It's do you know something? To me, the thing the Department of Justice goes all the way back to the foundation of the state. Like the attitude of the old power when it was here, when Britain were in here, was everybody outside the gates is a potential threat. There's elements of that in the department, and I think it has persisted. And you bring it forward to the 70s when they were genuinely perceived to be a threat to the state outside it. And that kind of old ethic, which you have in the Gardaí as well, that persisted the whole way. And I think that's a root of a lot of the issues that arise.
There was a report out actually earlier this year where they compared civil services. I think it was across 39 countries, and the Irish civil service came out 6th last out of that, and basically because they're opaque, because they won't tell anybody what they're doing, there's no communication. I mean, all the really big boxes were ticked, and that was tumbleweed. Nobody picked up, nobody said, why have we such an awful civil service? What is going on here? And as long as they keep ignoring the problem, we end up with a culture that nobody's ever going to tackle because they're too afraid to tackle it.
Yeah. What I will say on that though is, when you say we end up with it, we vote for it.
We all
agree. What are the priorities for the politicians are what they perceive as that which will get them votes. I remember I was out with canvassing, covering Mick Flanagan in the last European elections in Galway. So they had a really interesting day in the popularity of the guy in that. But I remember, and this had all blown up time, this was June 14, and all this Garda. And Ming had been involved in it, in fairness, with Claire Daly McWallace. And I said to him, have you had much reaction on the doorsteps about the Garda controversies and what's blowing up over the whole thing? And he said, I hate to say it, but no.
I did a day with Ming at the same time. And I asked pretty much the same question, because, being political anarch, you're into this stuff. And he said, no, nobody's interested. No. And he was trying to flog the line.
Absolutely was, in fairness to him. But it comes back. Again, what do the people want? You know? What are the priorities?
Well, I said, actually, before we came out, I put a little quote up on Twitter, because I can see this. If this is going to election, Maurice McCabe is going to be part of it, but may not be the biggest part of this election.
I don't think he'd be. If there's an election, I think he may nothing in it.
He may actually have been a spark, but like the actual topics are going to be on homelessness.
Yeah.
This election is going to be fought.
And not only that, for the man himself, I would say it would be a nightmare if he thought that he was regarded as being responsible for, or being a factor in, or being something people voted on. I think it would be a nightmare for him. He's been through enough already. Well, not to mind, apart from what he's subjected to for the last year or two at various junctures, he's been subjected to politicians, senior politicians, all ringing him morning, noon and night to state publicly they were on the phone to Maurice McCabe to start to carry on, you know.
And I know Maurice has to play the game to get justice in this. He must play the game.
But to be honest with you, I think he doesn't want to do it. I think he wants the whole thing to go away. I think he'd be glad when the whole thing's over. I think he wants to get on with his life, and just he wants the whole thing to disappear. But he has to go through a process, and I would guess that he is glad, at least, that the truth he believes will come out to some extent in the Charlton Tribunal. But in general terms, I think he just wants to get on with his life. And
he should be allowed to get on with his life, and like that, it's not. I can only imagine, because there are so many times you hear people go, "Well, I was talking to him," and you can imagine, you know, just change your number, Morris, because you know.
Where were they all?
Yes.
In 2012, 2013, when he was in the wilderness, when he needed some voices in politics, where were they?
Well, in fairness to yourself, Mick, you've done great work on this case, and I know, only for you in many ways yourself. I know Katie Hannon's done some great work, but it has been. Because we do have a tendency in this little echo chamber to attack the mainstream, and let's be completely fair and honest, because that's actual really great journalism. I want to move on just to the mechanics of what the 8th committee is about won't be finished its business till the end of December. We don't want the government to fall on the basis that we can't actually then do something in terms of a referendum for next year. I don't want to see that as a reason that we put up with a corrupt government, but I certainly don't want it to see for it to be fallen by the wayside and then used as an excuse by whoever comes in afterwards to say, sure, we need to set up a new mechanism again.
And we're hearing the same thing about Brexit, that there's meetings coming up with Brexit. Yeah, but Angela Merkel is over there and she has no government, or hasn't formed a government, and there's going to be an election in this country within, best guess 6 months. So Fine Gael may not be handling the Brexit anyway. So I don't see any real harm with Brexit. Then it was raised this morning about social welfare payments.
Mark, I'm going to stop you on the Brexit thing. It is a huge problem, because we lose our veto in a couple of weeks' time. Because we have to move, the talks must move from this stage onto the next. So in other words, Theresa May has about two or 3 weeks to agree the divorce bill, and then move on to talking trade. She's desperate to talk trade. Okay, that's what this is about. The EU are sitting there saying, "Give us pony up," and there's already offers being made, and there's substantial amounts of money that are on the table. Once we do that, we then start to negotiate as an EU 27 member bloc, and we lose our veto as an individual state. And if we lose our veto, we lose the veto on the border. So it's critical that Leo Varadkar, why he's playing hardball now, is because he has to. He has only got 2.5 weeks left to play hardball. Then it's like I think it's the most unfortunate thing that we've missed out on from my point of view is that Brexit is going to happen now on the 29th of March as opposed to the 1st of April, because I really wanted it to be the 1st of April, because I would have drafted that tweet calling April Fool's Day. I just wanted it to be the biggest April Fool's Day ever. But that's where we stand with that now.
It's a difficult position for everybody involved, and I know that the Uachtar na hÉireann has the opportunity to say, look, go back and take care of business and do your election in the new year. It's very hard to see which way this one's going to crumble, unless Frances Fitzgerald takes one for the team, and then all she's doing is putting this off until I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Yeah, but I would think, it's my guess, that one of the things that may prevent the general election is that everybody knows that the issue at hand here is not something that the public are going to engage with or are going to welcome on the doorstep saying you took a stand on this or that, and most people don't even know what it's about. And therefore, do they all take a chance in terms of going to the country over an issue like this in Christmas week. I would guess that between now and Tuesday, they'll all do as much as possible to ensure there's no election. But
well, I think
before.
I think Micheál Martin is in a corner. He can't come out of that corner unless Francis Fitzgerald resigns.
That seems to be the
It's
case,
him or her, and he's in that corner now. He loses the leadership, or she loses Taoiseach.
That seems to be the case. Yeah,
and I think again, Sinn Féin have a 3-month window where Jerry's going to step down.
Yeah.
Okay, he wants to do his lap of honour. Or we have the Labour Party and Alan Kelly. Appearing at the opening of a packet of crisps.
Well, there is a battle going on there, and it's not as one-sided as you think. There is a genuine challenge going on there, and it is a genuine. It's not just Alan Kelly coming out of the blue. This is an orchestrated, planned, dare I say, Varadkar-esque challenge. This man is in the same boat.
I always hark back to Leo telling people that there's no vacancy and I'm not interested, and yet he'd registered the website.
Oh no, you're right. I mean, it's all to that extent for a lot of them. Again, you mentioned Sinn Féin. Would it be opportunity for Sinn Féin to have an election? I don't think so. The Labour Party.
No,
I don't think they've.
20 years maybe.
Yeah, Fianna Fáil, again, are they going to get blamed for the whole thing?
By a cohort of the population, no doubt they will.
Yeah, and Fine Gael themselves, they're in situ at the moment. Do they want to go with the possibility that they may have to be, it may be flipped, and that they might have to support Fianna Fáil in a minority thing?
Well, they did come out very strong. Fine Gael have come out very strong, and they've basically just put the line in the sand and said, look, there you go, we're not moving.
Yeah, I suspect there'll be talks over this weekend or something. No, maybe. Again, these things run out of control.
Well, it's like a war. Both sides will build up, and both sides will say, we don't want the war, but, the war happens.
Yeah, it's like instead of Micheál Martin, Leo Varadkar, you've Donald Trump and Kim
Jong-un.
Yeah. Well, the supply and confidence is dead. It's dead in the water right now. Once they tabled the motion, and I think it was Simon Coveney who said, "That's it. It's dead."
Yeah.
So basically, we are on an election footing right now, and we're going to be on an election footing until they name the date.
I mean, in that regard, Martin, in terms of the practicalities, personally, be a pain in the ass because they have to be out working Christmas week, tearing around the country. But leave that aside. The average voter, and it's voters they're talking about as opposed to citizen, do they want to be engaging with this thing coming up to Christmas?
No.
Well,
a very good point came out there on the radio today. Postmen, they're on 12-hour days coming up. They're under severe pressure. How are they going to get out voting cards?
Yeah.
Coming up to Christmas week.
And then there's the mail shots on top. Everyone is entitled to their mail shot. If it does go ahead, and we had a little talk about this earlier, if it does go ahead, this could see a sea change in how elections are fought in Ireland. It would have to be an electronic, media-based campaign for everybody. You're not going to be knocking on doors Christmas week. People will tell you to sod off.
I wonder about that from this point of view. Technologically, you're absolutely right. Culturally, remember, we're still in a country where a huge proportion of the voters actually know their local member of parliament, have met him or her, have engaged with them, and they like that. I just wonder whether that intimacy in terms of society, I wonder even technologically with all the advances, can you get away from that? But you're right, in a lot of places, they won't be well treated, but they'll still want to see them.
And it goes to the point where I think I've made this, someone said, I remember in the build-up to the last election, someone pointed out, and I thought it was a very clever thing, that Fianna Fáil had the worst social media presence of any of the parties and had the worst footprint in the actual electronic world, and yet they came back like Lazarus from the dead. They pulled back seats that people thought they wouldn't, and it went to what you were saying. They had the commands, they had the local, they have the roots.
It's down to 41 general elections. Every constituency is its own election, and you can have a wind behind you, you can have a few slogans, you can have a leader who has a certain appeal. All these things are extras, But the relationship between the TD, and you can argue all day or night whether it's a positive or a negative thing, and it is both positive and very negative aspects. But that relationship is still there, and I think that's a feature that's going to have in elections here for a while.
Well, to coin a phrase, it's the unknown knowns, and the known unknowns is the territory we're in now.
What about the unknowns that were unknown but are now known and maybe unknown again?
That sounds like a Kerry football. Right?
I think we'll wrap it up on that, because guys, honestly, I just want to say first of all, thanks very much for Mick coming in.
Delighted to come in, lads. Thanks very much.
It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to have you in this little.
And we were delighted we could leave you in the green room for 3 hours beforehand.
yeah.
That bottle of gin certainly helped.
Entertainment there, lads, is something unbelievable.
Listen, folks, just Mick has kindly brought us in a copy of his book, and we're going to give that away to one lucky listener. All you have to do is like, subscribe, follow, or review the podcast on whatever your preferred podcast player is. All you got to take a screenshot of it and tweet it to us. Look, this is a Twitter-based thing. Just send us a thing, and we'll put you into the draw. The winner will probably be announced next Friday, is it?
Yeah, we'll see next Friday. And the other thing too is now is the time to go out and buy books, and this time of the year is when most books are sold. Now, if you haven't read Mick's book, you don't really know. It's jigsaw pieces, and Mick has put the puzzle together, and there's more and more pieces being added all the time, and we believe more and more pieces are being rearranged. So I'd say get out, buy this book, get informed, because if there is an election in February, March, April, this is the genesis of the election. Read it, be informed. We're all about being informed. What do you think, Tony?
I just want look. You know what? You've done that and that sponsored ad now, and I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking for an agent there.
I suppose you got to give him something, because like when we had this conversation the other night with Dublin on the drive for 5 and the Kerry background.
And what do you think Kerry's chances this year?
It's like what you call him. Mao Zedong when asked about the French Revolution, like it's way too early.
Yeah. Listen, Mick, thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thanks for listening, folks. And as I said, get those screenshots into us, and we'll talk to you all soon. Okay, thank you.